Park Howell is known as an industrious storyteller. He is a 35-plus year veteran of the advertising industry and host of the popular weekly Business of Story podcast. He's also author of Brand Bewitchery and co-author of The Narrative Gym for Business. On this podcast, he'll tell us how to use the Abt Framework for storytelling, which means A for and, B for but, T for therefore. It's a narrative framework which all power for storytelling begins. So let's listen to him. Welcome to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katrina Burrus, and today we have an expert in storytelling, Park Howell. Park, welcome.
Oh, Dr. Burrus, thank you so much for having me.
So I met you at the social media marketing world and was impressed with your presentation, how you made storytelling so simple and doable. So the first question I want to ask you is, what did you study in college to prepare you to what you do today? So maybe you can tell us what you do today and the journey you had.
You bet. Yeah, I've been in the advertising, branding, marketing world for the past 35 plus years. And in that time, I ran my own ad agency in Phoenix, Arizona for 20 of those years. And now for the past 10 to 12 years, I've done nothing but focused on teaching leaders, business leaders, brand leaders, sales and marketing leaders, how to use story to excel in anything that they are trying to bring to market or to get to, people to buy into. And I suppose really where my storytelling background came from is growing up in Seattle, Washington, one of 7 kids my parents had in 9 years. So you had to be a pretty good storyteller to be able to stand out in that particular crowd.
That's for sure. Wow. That's a lot of kids.
My dad had one rule at the dinner table, and that was you had to keep one foot on the floor. Everything else went. So
Really?
Give you an idea of, it was a fairly robust family to say the least. But I started playing the piano when I was a little kid, 3rd grade. I started taking piano lessons, and Katrina was writing music all the time. I just wrote slews of crazy little songs and ditties. And I loved it so much that when I went to WSU, Washington State University, to study communications, I also got a degree in music composition and theory. Now, I figured I probably would not become a famous composer and could, feed a family off my compositions. So I went into the advertising and marketing world, but everything I learned as a composer and how to create themes and melodies and rhythm all had such a tremendous impact on my writing skills and ability in the advertising world. And then when I was running my own ad agency, I realized that advertising as we knew it, this is along about 2002, 2003, no longer worked as we knew it, primarily because of the digital age coming on. Our clients and our customers, the brands, used to own the influence of mass media. Well, as we all know, the masses have become the media. They are willing to share your story, the pros and cons of it with everyone out there. And it appreciably changed how advertising worked. So I went looking for a solution and an answer to this of how can you stand out in a very crowded, noisy world. And Katrina, it just comes back down that age-old survival tool, learning tool that we all Homo sapiens use, and that is the power of storytelling. So I learned frameworks out of Hollywood and from other people, and started applying them in the advertising, branding, marketing world to great success.
You need to tell us, because just before we recorded, you mentioned how music has the same structure as storytelling in a lot of ways, and you quoted Mozart. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and that was interesting because back when I was studying the Sonata Allegro form, our professors talked about it being completely based off of story structure, of 3-act story structure, set of problem resolution. In their case, it was exposition, development, resolution. And so what Mozart and his colleagues would do is they set a theme, they set a rhythm, they set the tone of a piece of music, and maybe it's written in a major key and it moves along up front, and they introduce all these different thematic suggestions in it. And then they jump into the middle of the song, the development, and they turn everything on its ear, literally, so that you as a listener will sit there on the edge of your seat asking yourself, how does this all come together? How does this conclude? That's what keeps you tuned in, listening, that then it gets to the very end, the resolution of how they bring all of this together. And back then, I didn't really quite equate it to the world of storytelling. I just thought, oh, that was kind of cool. It was when I really started studying story in Hollywood and the hero's journey and so forth, that all came rushing back to me. And you see this 3-part structure to story everywhere, not just in music, not just in storytelling, but in arguments. And any time that you are trying to sell your idea, you always have to begin with this common ground, this act 1, if you will, the setting. Act 2, then the problem that you are solving for on behalf of your customer, your audience. And act 3 then is your call to action of how you are there with the solution they need to help them get what they want out of life. That's how it all kind of came together for me.
And a lot of people say you got to tell the problem and then the solution. But what I like about in your theory is that you have a common ground. You have to agree on something before you disagree. So there's a dichotomy right in the storytelling instead of just starting with the challenge, for example.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Because if you start with that challenge, you're making an assumption that your audience believes that's the same problem that you are trying to solve. They may push back on that. They may say, no, Park, that's actually not what I care about. I care about this over here. So you want to start with agreement. What is it that they want and why is it important to them? And you share that right up top. So you validate your audience's position. Then you insert the but, the problem, the contradiction. But you don't have it because of this. And they then are nodding in agreement with you. You're exactly right. Therefore, I can help you get it by doing this.
Okay, so maybe an example would be great. Okay, go ahead. Say how your process is.
I call it the ABT, the and, but, therefore. It's a foundational narrative framework that I actually learned from a guy back in 2013 by the name of Dr. Randy Olson. Now, Dr. Olson is a Harvard PhD evolutionary biologist. He gave up tenure, went to film school at USC, graduated, wrote, directed, and produced 3 documentaries on climate change and global warming. But more importantly, has written, I think now, 7 books teaching scientists and academics how to use these story frameworks that he learned in Hollywood to be able to communicate their big ideas. At the center of everything he teaches now, and I teach right alongside of him, is this fundamental framework called the and, but, therefore. So when I saw it in a second book called Connection, I immediately saw the power of it for business, for branding. So while he teaches it in the science academic world, I teach it in the business, leadership, branding, sales, and marketing world. And it works, Katrina, because it uses the 3 forces of story. And that is agreement, contradiction, and consequence. Every story, large or small, is built on this chassis, this framework of agreement, contradiction, consequence. So you use the and in your statement of agreement. You want this, and it's important to you because of this. Then you introduce the conflict. But you don't have it because of this. Therefore, I'm going to help you get it by doing this, this, and this. And it works because those 3 forces of agreement, contradiction, and consequence play beautifully to our primal limbic brain, which is basically cause and effect, pattern seeking, decision making, subconscious mind, that you open a story loop with it. You then raise the tension in the conflict section of it. So it is begging for the answer. What do we do about this certain situation? And that's where your call to action comes into play.
So give us some examples.
All right. So I do a lot of work with brands, large and small, and I was doing some work with Home Depot in their sales team internally. And one of the guys in there said, Park, what's the shortest ABT you've ever, heard of? And I go, well, I've got one for you. It's 10 words long. And this is for everybody out there. You communicate and care, but bore. Therefore, tell a story. Now, before I offend everybody, it's really meant as much tongue in cheek as I can. But whenever we get into organizational communications, when we are really trying to sound and look smart, what do? We lead with data, charts, graphs, and none of that has an impact on your audience unless you put it in the context of the story. So what you do when you lead with data, charts, and graphs is you end up boring that Homo sapien brain that is sitting out there looking for the story that makes it interesting, that shows it actionable in your presentation. I mean, all you got to do, Katrina, is ask yourself, what is the first syllable of the word numbers? It's num, right? Yeah. Those digits do not work unless we turn that data into drama for our audiences. And that's where you can begin with the and, but, therefore. So for instance, let's expand the one that I just told you. And say, I'm just going to use it since it's top of mind for me for the business of story of what I do. So say, for instance, I'm going to identify a leader of a purpose-driven brand. And I'm going to come right out and say it and say, you are a leader of a purpose-driven brand. And you know that if you can connect on a deep, visceral level with your prospects, then you can turn them into lifelong customers. That's our statement of agreement. But now here's the problem. You're not connecting like you could because you're leading with logic and reason when what your audience really wants is the emotional pull of a story. Therefore, hack through the noise and hook the hearts of your audience by using the basic foundational framework of the and, but, and therefore, where all truly powerful business leadership, storytelling, and communications begins.
I love it. I love it.
That's a longer form of my ABT. So I started with the very short one I gave you, but now I expanded on it. It uses those forces of stories. It doesn't really tell you a story because I'm not taking you to a time and a place and a moment and have a central character, but I am making you the central character by placing you at the beginning of that statement of agreement, and the brand doesn't show up till the very end. And you only use that ABT to set the stage for a longer presentation or maybe to set up a story you're about ready to tell them.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so doable. Like, as I mentioned earlier, before we started, I mean, I took all the challenges of my clients and then used the ABT system. So to get used to this process, and then it's a lot easier.
Shall we try one on you? Do you have one you'd like to roll out? And I'll do a little live coaching for you.
Well, I'll start by what I used to have. Okay. So it's like I work with brilliant jerks that want to
I love that, by the way.
That want to transform into inspiring leader. Okay? So go ahead.
Well, if you are sitting down from someone and you only have 15 seconds or a one-floor elevator pitch, I call it, they're going to get off on floor number 2. I want you to tell me exactly what you do using an and, but, therefore.
So the agreement is that communication is key, or I can say emotional intelligence is key for better communication. That's probably emotional intelligence is too conceptual. So I would say when you want to communicate, but you don't know how to say it in the most tactful way. But I even said but in it. So I would say, so you want to communicate a difficult message the most tactfully, but you're a bit abrasive in your ways. Therefore, you need a way to develop your emotional intelligence to get the best outcome or something. I see. Yes. I need your help here. So go ahead.
No, this is good. So you are with this person and you've done your research. So you're telling this story from their perspective, and you are going to use the pronoun term of you. So, you're a hard charging leader and you have some difficult news to provide. But if you, so this is what I will do sometimes too. I've got to think through it a little bit. Bob, you've got some difficult news to present. And if you can get your team to open up and embrace it, then you can all move forward in a very productive way. But you're not connecting with them because you are a little too abrasive. You're a hard charging type A personality. tends to overwhelm them. Therefore, let's get you connecting on a deep level by really working on your emotional intelligence through these 3 simple things that I'm going to ask you to do next. Something like that.
Love it.
The problem you're solving for in your but statement, and that's where I always like to start with, is but you're abrasive. And what does that mean, actually? But you're not connecting with them because you're abrasive. So what we want to start doing is think about, okay, what's our singular narrative here? I think in just this quick one we worked here, our singular narrative is all around the word connection. You've got some difficult coaching to do. And if you can connect on a deep level, then you can move everyone forward in a positive way. But you're not currently connecting because you're abrasive and people fear you. Therefore, let's get you connecting on that deep level by taking you through this such and such and such. So the connection in this case is the singular narrative. And the problem statement is you're not connecting because you're abrasive. So you're using this cause and effect tool of using the word because as your pivot word in that but you're not connecting because you're abrasive. Yeah. So that's kind of the way I would look at doing that. You want to keep that first statement of agreement positive. And both you and I actually defaulted to a negative right up top with that first one on the first round. And
good. I make all the mistakes so people can learn from it.
We all do it. And that's the funny thing. I don't know if it's our negativity bias or what, but whenever we write these ABTs, not all the time, but sometimes you're going to find yourself starting with that negative statement up top, and that's not what you want. You want a positive, optimistic, aspirational statement up top. You essentially are trying to paint a brighter picture of what tomorrow could look like. You are creating a fiction that you want them to be able to live into, but they're not currently going to live into that fiction because of this problem. Therefore, if you do what I show you, we're going to turn that fiction into reality. And that's the whole sort of magic. I say you've got to understand the magic if you're going to cast the spell. That's how you get people leaning in. And they will have a tendency to agree with your statement of agreement of what that brighter tomorrow looks like much more readily than if you lead with a problem statement, a downer, bummer statement. They may push back on you there. That's why that's so important.
I think that's a very important point because so many marketing people start with a negative. So, the dichotomy between the positive and the negative is much more powerful. So you also would like to ask, you mentioned that the effectiveness of the hero journey and the Pixar Way and these longer form storytelling is not always the best way to move forward. So can you explain yourself?
Yeah. And believe me, Katrina, I learned it the hard way. So when I started studying story in Hollywood, our middle child, our son Parker, was going to film school at Chapman University. And I said, please send me your books and your lectures when you're done with them, since I'm paying for them, because I would like to learn what do they teach you to become a competitive storyteller in the most competitive storytelling market in the world, Hollywood and LA. And that's when I heard and learned about the hero's journey. And that's, Joseph Campbell, America's foremost mythologist. He's got this thing called the monomyth. And it's either at 12 to 17 steps, depending on who you read. And it's pretty prevalent. I mean, it's a monomyth because stories since the very beginning of time have followed this same pattern. And they follow it because it's a mirror to our life. Well, I took it and I boiled it down to 10 steps that I call the story cycle system. And I mapped it specifically to business and brand story strategy in developing a brand that had more meaning, more humanity to it, but to really find the overall narrative structure for a brand so they could go out and communicate in a more powerful way. And we had a lot of great success with it because we were able to grow brands by as much as 600% using it. I thought people could take my book called Brand Bewitchery and immediately apply it in their world. Some can, but most still need guidance. It's a very powerful book in and of itself because it teaches you how to become a stronger storyteller. But I found out that most of that stuff comes down the road. So I went from the complexity of the hero's journey or the Pixar Way or the 15 Beats to Story written by Blake Snyder and Save the Cat down to the 5 primal elements of a short story for big impact, something that you can tell in under a minute that makes your business point for you. down to the and, but, therefore, the 3 and, but, therefore, agreement, contradiction, consequences, forces of story. And all of my training now begins with the ABT because you can apply it everywhere in your email writing, in your sales presentations, on your home pages, on your landing pages, your thank you notes, anywhere that you are trying to hook that brain starts with that little and, but, therefore. Everybody can get their mind around that and use it immediately. So all of my training begins with the ABT and then grows into the 5 primal elements of a short story for big impact. And then those that really need it for long form communication, presentation, or brand story strategy, then we dive into the story cycle system, which is also based off of the and, but, therefore. So that's why you can see it all begins with those 3 important words.
Yes, and you can build up to have all those systems, but at least it's hard enough to get in the habit of doing it.
Well, I'll give you an example, some more ROI on it. I'm working with a SaaS company, software as a service, and they're a global company. They work in the heavy construction industry and have software products that help with workflows and estimating and that sort of thing for very, very, very large global companies. I taught their sales and marketing team, took them through my ABT training program, and then I've been coaching them on LinkedIn campaigns. And so they'll do 10 LinkedIn posts a week and have this whole campaign running. Well, in March, they ran their typical ones, and they were actually not doing too bad. They're getting between 3 and 4% engagement, which is pretty good, even to LinkedIn's numbers. I mean, LinkedIn says your average engagement of a post is like 2%. Well, I taught them, went in, we reworked them, building them out in this ABT format. And the sponsor that brought me in, Kari, sent it to me. She said, wow, this was like some pretty amazing ROI. We took those 3 and 4% posts, and now we're getting 9, 10, 12, even 17% on average interactions, engagements with them on LinkedIn. The only thing they did different between March and April was using this and, but, therefore method to reframe and rewrite these short, simple posts to be able to hack through the noise out there and hook into the limbic brain, that cause and effect, pattern seeking, decision-making brain that we want to be reaching in the first place.
So this is by putting comments on something you posted or responding to comments on something you posted. Or both.
Well, you could use it that way, or it's the post itself is really what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So they're posting on products and videos they want people to watch, and sales materials they want people to go to. So they write their typical posts and they push it out there, and they'll have an image on it associated with it, whatever. But most posts, it happens with everybody out there, they're just like features and functions and blah, blah, blah. Aren't we wonderful? Aren't we great? Well, we rewrite these posts from the reader's point of view, starting with that pronoun of you in that very first statement of agreement. But here's the problem we're solving for in this post. Therefore, click here for your answer or for your video or for whatever it might be. That is what is truly the difference in it. So instead of just writing boring posts that just lay there, they're now using the and, but, therefore to create posts that actually resonate and get people to click on them.
I see. Very, very astute. And where do you see storytelling in business and leadership heading?
Well, I hope it gets better. I mean, the biggest thing right now, storytelling is like the secret weapon that those that really understand it and get it, use it to great effect. But that's a very, very minute portion of all of business and leadership out there. I think what it requires is more people taking the time to really understanding, embracing, quote unquote, this soft skill that they have probably discounted in the past, and realize that if they really understand how to tell these stories, or they know the importance of this overall narrative, but they're going to go out and they're going to hire really good storytellers to come in and work and tell these stories, be interesting to your customers, you are going to have a real impact on your bottom line, on your ROI. You're going to have a real impact on recruiting and retention. There's just a study that just came out by Grammarly and Harris Polls. In fact, I'm going to be interviewing the author to the study this coming Friday on my Business of Story podcast, and it's called The Backbone of Business is Broken. And it talks about the miscommunication that is happening inside of businesses because business leaders aren't paying attention to it. And it costing American businesses $1.2 trillion annually, measured by retention and recruitment, degradation of the brand when their stories and communications aren't crystal clear, loss of business they missed out on in the first place because they didn't do a good enough job of rallying the troops around their story. So if business wants to get real about a soft skill that will have a tremendous impact on their bottom line, it's going to be in storytelling. And I think that's where it's going. I mean, it's become a bit of a buzzword these days, but still, I'm going to say 98% of businesses are not using it to its fullest effect. Absolutely. And I would say 80% of businesses aren't using it at all.
So where can people get a hold of you?
Well, they can find me over at businessofstory.com, or feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. My name is Park, P-A-R-K, Howell, H-O-W-E-L-L. And so I've got Park Howell as my handle out there. And those are probably the two best ways to reach me. And, the one other thing I might mention too is I've got these short little online courses on Thinkific. You can go to businessofstory.thinkific.com. And there's one on the ABTs of selling, and there's one on the ABTs of branding. And they're between 18 to 25 minutes in length. They're very short, but they will teach you the fundamentals of how to use the ABTs, share with you a lot of examples of the ABT being in use out there. And I even invite people that take the course, it's all of $35, it doesn't cost very much, to send me their ABT when they write it, and I'll be happy to give them some free email coaching on it.
What a great idea. Thank you so very much, Park. This is super interesting, and I loved your presentation as well. So I encourage my listeners first to go and check out Park's course. Also, look at his book, Brand Bewitchery, and the Narrative Gym for Business. Thank you very much, Park.
Katrina, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. You can subscribe to all future podcasts at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. Join us each Wednesday to learn more about the latest trends in leadership techniques and bring your coaching to the next level. To learn more about Dr. Burrus' CEO Mastermind, use the contact form at excellentexecutivecoaching.com.